Pete Hegseth, thanks so much for taking the time to join me
Thanks
today.
for having me, Ben. Appreciate it.
So congratulations on the success of your book, The Battle for the American Mind. What made you decide to prioritize writing about education in America?
Well, it's something I've always been passionate about. I'm a parent. I got a bunch of kids. I had the default assumption that a lot of people had for most of my life, that as a public school kid, my dad was a public school teacher. That's what I'd want my kids to do. If it was good enough for me, it's good enough for them. And yeah, I know there's some hostility there, but that's been the default until we started doing, well, it happened years ago, but more recently started digging into the educational industrial complex in our country, specifically K through 12, of how captured the entire system is. That the idea of moving to a zip code or a place where the community is a little bit more conservative, so the schools probably reflect that. That is a bygone era. That's not the case anymore because of how the unions and the prerogatives and the curriculum and the school boards and the state departments of ed, the federal departments of ed, the teachers' colleges have all consolidated around, as you know, not just, left-wing bias, but sheer hard left indoctrination. And I salute parents that protest at school board meetings. I think it's great. But the analogy we use in the book is that's like charging a fortified machine gun nest with Nerf guns. Now, we salute your efforts, but you're all going to die because my mom did the same thing in 80s and 90s on some much more benign curriculum in my middle school. It was good for me because I got pulled out of those things, but the momentum continued. And then when you consider the recent moment, which in the first chapter we call the COVID-16-19 moment, the last couple of years when parents were home looking at Zoom classrooms and seeing the curriculum and saying, what in the world happened? Hemingway once wrote of bankruptcy that it happens gradually and then it happens suddenly. And I think that's what parents are seeing now in K through 12 classrooms is the sudden, to wrap it all together, wokeness or critical race theory, critical gender theory that they see is a product of a over 100-year pipeline that was not accidental, that was quite intentional, almost always from atheists and socialists, eventually Marxists, who knew that the affections of our youngest kids were their top prize if they wanted to affect social change. And so as a parent, I thought, man, the biggest aspect of this book is to shake people awake to it. I mean, the first step to recovery is understanding the depth of your problem. So it identifies how we got here, and then it spends 5 chapters talking about the solutions and what we have to do about it.
What was a trigger moment for you in coming to understand that old paradigm that you describe is one that doesn't apply anymore? Because lots of Americans, including a lot of people I talk to, have the rationale of, well, I'll just move to a redder area, a redder state or something like that when it's time for my kids to go to a school that's going to teach them something more serious than how to finger paint.
Probably my own school district. We did the same thing, moved to a nice community, pay a bucket load of property taxes, know a lot of the teachers. They're very nice people. But then once you get inside the hallways, if you just look around, you see what is prioritized and specifically what is absent. And I just remember talking to my wife and saying, we've got a 3rd grade son who's very impressionable, who is, going to listen to precisely what his teachers have to say, as I did. When I was 13, 14, 15, whatever your teacher said was gospel. And you look at, for us, it was the evidence not just of the LGBT stuff, which is now mandatory across schools in New Jersey, but the climate change worship, which was ubiquitous and sort of absolute dogma inside the school for young kids. I thought, not only do I not want to be deprogramming, I would like the school to reinforce actual liberal arts thinking, the liberation of the mind, free thinking, critical thinking, focus on history, not a certain aspect of history, all of world history, all of human history, biblical history, Western civilization. And then as you start to research and unravel it, you realize I got a progressive education and I didn't even know it. And that was in the 1990s. And exurb Minnesota, middle class upbringing. We all did. And then when you start to unwind the threads, you start to realize how in the world they did it. So that was the wake up call for me as a parent, is all my own kids. And then the other 6 that I'm going to put through education. I can't deprogram them enough on Sunday morning and Wednesday night at church and over the dinner table. Considering our culture and the reinforcement of social media and our other forms of culture, it's an uphill battle. And I want to give them more fortification than I had.
There is obviously, I think, an awareness on some people's part after this COVID-16-19 moment that their school wasn't teaching their kids what they thought they were being taught, or that it was teaching them a lot of things that they would have a problem with. But what is the Nerf gun charging parent supposed to do instead? It's a feeling like you're, a David taking on a Goliath, even if you have a bunch of other people doing the running with you. Obviously, you spend a significant part of the book talking about solutions. What do those look like?
Well, first of all, is truly an what's the word of the left? Implicit bias, right? We all have an implicit bias toward public education because a lot of us had it, and we revere it as a principle for equal opportunity in this country. Everyone should have a chance at a good education, and so we all default to that. First, just breaking down the preconceived notion that Johnny's going to be okay. He can make it through because of enough. Disavowing people of that notion is the first and most important one, because we all kind of want to go like this and say, I think they can make it out as survivors. Mm-hmm. That's number one. Number two, if you can, get out. Get out. The book's not in the business of saying, here's how you tinker with the existing structure. As a military guy, we use the phrase tactical retreat. The enemy's got us surrounded. There's no hope for victory at this particular moment. Tactically retreat, find another option. Now, the book's a big advocate for classical Christian schooling. It's actually a much larger network than people are aware of. It's the type of liberal arts education that our founders got that brought them to the brilliance of 1776. World history, good and bad, Greek, Latin, great books, engagement with biblical wisdom. We advocate for that, and there are a lot more of those schools, and they're actually much more affordable than most private or elite schools. But homeschooling has exploded. Co-op homeschooling has exploded. Online options have exploded. If you want to, there is a cost-effective alternative. I'm not saying it's going to check all the boxes of what you want. I want my kids to play like big-time high school sports. What do I care about that compared to what kind of citizen and Christian they're going to be when they're 18 years old? So unpacking the things that really do matter. And then, you know what? Hey, if you can't move and, for life circumstance reasons, and the public school is your only option, then you'd better make it a full-time job to be all over it. What they bring home, what the discussions they have in private and in public at school, watch social media and devices of your kids that reinforce those messages. So you just have to be aware of the fact that you are up against something that's not going to change. Even if you reelect a different school board, you may get changes on the margins, or you move to Florida where DeSantis has done amazing things. You're going to be prevented from some things. But inside your conservative community, the teachers there came from the same pipeline of teachers that go to Cambridge, Massachusetts, the same accreditation agencies, the same teachers' colleges, the same curriculum, the same pedagogy. So it is awareness of the depth of the problem. I think if you can get them out as fast as you can, and fortify them.
One of the things that was interesting about this whole explosion in homeschooling for me is that my siblings and I were all homeschooled. We were, raised in that, in part because we didn't live in a place with a great public education offering at the time, and we were kind of early to market, homeschool hipsters when it came to going through the process. And the thing that I always say is, while I'm an advocate of homeschooling, and I certainly support it, is it's not for everybody. It takes a lot of work. And you also have to have kids who are a little bit more self-motivated than, your average student necessarily. Otherwise, it becomes very difficult. Some kids respond to, a lot more structure or a lot more socialization. But others, can run ahead with something like homeschooling and really, achieve a lot of things that they couldn't in a public system. Mm-hmm. What can we do from a government policy perspective to encourage these alternate approaches to education without also having government policy basically follow the money and invade either the homeschool or the Christian classical school or something like that.
You're right over the target. You're exactly right. First of all, homeschooling was almost outlawed, as you know. There was an attempt to do so. I think it was in the 70s or 80s. They tried to outlaw private education. So from the beginning, progressives have attempted to consolidate their monopoly on the American mind, and that was survived, thankfully. We have to create first an alternate ecosystem. And I kind of shared the critiques of homeschooling that you're talking about. I think it's phenomenal. It's just scaling it to the point where we have enough kids coming out of it doesn't necessarily feel like it gets us exactly where we need to be. Charlie Kirk just launched Turning Point Academy. This network of classical Christian schools has exploded just in the last decade. There are almost 500 across the country. The first, we call it an educational insurgency in the book as we talk about it. I can't help but think in military terms. Phase one of an insurgency is creating the necessary networks, connecting people. So that's building schools, starting schools, giving to schools so that they can expand, so that the number of kids in classical Christian right now is about 60,000 across the country. You compare that to the 70 million in public school, it's a drop in the bucket. But if you can double, triple that, you're not going to get 50% of kids coming out of it. But if you can get 2, 3, 4%, that's a pretty important number. That's what was actively involved in 1776. It's always a motivated, self-aware, principled, small part of the population that can drive change. To the policy point, though, we talk about that more in phase two. First, you got to go at the unions and defund them. It's not constitutional to have government unions to begin with, so we should go at that. And then I believe the solution we go with is a universal educational tax credits, so that the money isn't going through the government to the institution and the control isn't following the money to the institution, but instead financial options go to the parent, and the parent can choose where they're distributed to: classical, Christian, Catholic, Jewish, homeschool, secular, government schools, whatever. I think a true educational tax credit at the state or federal level could break the backs of the monopoly of public education, forcing them to attempt to compete and reject some of the worst aspects of the ideological approach that they take, and then maybe actually orient them on excellence too, which is something they abandoned a long time too. So those are a couple of the things, but the book's not a policy book. It's more about this change is going to come from an alternate educational ecosystem, and here's why we think this is the right one.
Stands for freedom, and they can't take that